Hey folks, Steve here with another Highway to the Kremlin video. This is the continuation of our retreat campaign scenario, with all the weird sort of hazy bits around it as we go. In the last video, we covered turns 1 through 4 of this scenario. In this video, we're going to try to cover um, at least 4. I could see me maybe trying to push and do the rest of it. There's really 7 turns left in the game, right? This is not we're playing until some great victory. It's literally like we're going to play through the rest of the turns that the turn track has, and we will look at the shape of the armies when we get there and try to make some assessment, a critical assessment of success. Did Napoleon get home okay? He lost all of Murat's forces, which is a bummer. And the Russians are trying to catch up and maybe even cut them off as best they can hope for. So we'll be playing through that. Again, this is the shortened, abbreviated way I'm doing coverage. So we're going to talk about the results of each turn and just try to get it through. That should mean that this video is maybe in the ballpark of 45 minutes long, and it's just mostly commentary on the progression and weird things that we're starting to encounter, like, hey, it's winter, the rivers are freezing, which means they're no longer the death sentence that they were often before, and that means that it is trickier to get a decisive route on an enemy force, for instance. That's a big key. That's going to be hard to tie somebody down and really destroy them at this point, which is how we were using the rivers before, right? Great to force your opponent to retreat over a river without a bridge, because then they will take double losses potentially. Potentially, there's circumstances to that, but that's going to start to go away as we deal with snow and frost and this, that, and the other. So anyway, we're going to get into playing this turn here, and um, not a lot else to cover. If you watched the previous video, just on the edges of things, there is pressure from the Russians on the Austrians down here. There's an army, fairly large one, marching to cut the entire supply line of the French unless something changes. We have a tango with MacDonald and Saint-Cyr, with Wittgenstein in the north part. We could send MacDonald down to delay that slow-moving army. And then Napoleon himself is set up in Orsha and preparing to begin his own march west back to Vilna. Is probably the next major milestone of the retreat, with Kutuzov and a string of forces behind him along the highway, trying to get their own sort of supply tracing line of communication stuff sorted out to be efficient, so that they can push quickly on and try to shut the French down. The Paris morale track is at -4. That is from the recapture of Moscow and Smolensk, worth 2, and then there was the loss of Murat's army, which was, the battle was worth 1, and then the capture of Murat himself was another one. So it's really, all not good for the French. That is affecting attrition. The weather will tend to affect attrition, and it's really kicking in more than it's ever kicked in before at this point, because that low morale, combined with the, when it's there, the weather diral modifier to attrition, just makes it that, like, no matter what you roll, you're losing something, which is, that's not what the French would like to be seeing happen here. All right, I'm going to go play this turn 5, I believe it would be. Um, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, turn 5. And we'll show the aftermath. You can imagine, we're going to continue to shift. We started up here. We're shifting the camera left as we go. And we'll see where the new focal point is. Okay, here we are after the end of turn 5. Not really as entertaining as you might expect. We had one good opportunity right outside Orsha, where the Russians were maybe going to catch Davout by himself, because amazingly I rolled the 6 for Napoleon's initiative, and Napoleon wasn't going to be able to help him out. So I thought, oh man, maybe something's going to happen here. But Davout managed to activate and um, and get away. So just not as entertaining as you might have thought. Now he had a lot of penalties um, to the die roll, but he still managed to get out. So it's sort of like really bad luck for Napoleon, really good luck for Davout, and he got out. And now they continue to fall back out of the way, basically. So yeah, not what else is happening here? We're moving some units around. We're starting to get towards the west end of the map. We're clearly on the west map itself. We're leaving a couple of garrisons behind. There's not much to say there. We're just going to have to do that. Have kind of looked at, do I have an opportunity for a counterattack at Kutuzov as we make our progression? The weather has been snow, which has been making attacks not necessarily, as good of an idea because everybody gets a +1. Um, so it could be we spend the rest of these turns just marching home, and that's all she wrote, baby. Unless something big happens, like us getting Tishagov up here to cut the supply line at Vilnius, like that would be. I see that as right now the only big thing that could end up happening over these next couple of turns. I'm not sure that they're going to um, anything like that's really going to happen in any real sense. So what I may even do is actually play through the next couple of turns and rather than one turn and talk about it because we're just going to get to the point where like this is the end. I mean, any way you want to look at it, we're kind of at the end state, and there's not going to be that much more to look at, and we'll just have to assess the situation. I think we'd probably be looking at a more fun situation if I didn't do the tunnel vision on Murat, honestly. I think that was a mistake out of the get go. I should have. It guaranteed that I bagged them, but it didn't necessarily mean that the rest of the campaign was going to be that entertaining because we're chasing Napoleon rather than shadowing him every step of the way. We're really just trying to catch him. And at this point, I don't see that really happening. I mean, unless we've been heavily reliant on initiative die rolls, we're kind of at the point where we can start to shave off some APs for movement commands, and I'm probably going to need to do that to start pulling in some of these uh, weaker leaders that are on the map. And though we do kind of have to leave the center of operations up, so that'd be one thing. So this might be Napoleon is now at Borisov. I could use this as an operational pause and start distributing some once we get our center of operations flipped back up. Spend some AP on movement commands to get some of these major generals moving back and back and back and meet up maybe with McDonald so there's at least a leader to manage the units and hold there at Vilnius. We've got a unit that's kind of on the outskirts of Riga that I really should be considering pulling back as well, and I need to get him moving. So if I want to get as many strength points as possible, I have to have a reserve of AP to spend and the ability to spend movement commands. So, like, if our center of operations is here, we could get him a movement command. We can move McDonald down here and move with initiative to absorb this guy. We could get Saint-Cyr back. Like we start to retract, but I need to adjust kind of the game situation so that we can get everybody we need to get out of the area of operations. Um, there's not that many more garrisons that we're going to be able to retrieve. Like we just simply have to leave some behind because we can't mess around going to pick them up. We just don't have the time or the initiative capability to do that. So we're going to leave some garrisons on the board no matter what we do. Russians are going to keep rolling here as they steadily make their way up, and that's kind of all she wrote. And unfortunately, we still have a long way to go for the center of operations to be all the way forward to leverage our partisans to good effect. So we really missed out. We had a little bit of help from the partisans causing problems at the beginning. The French are moving fast enough, though it is costing in terms of attrition to catch them. And it is at the point now on a forced march. Like I don't even want to do forced marches as the French really because it's not great. Certainly not great die rolls for them as they're going if they go very far. So at most, like 1 or 2 hexes on a forced march just to be in a better position on their own turn to move. And that's kind of all she wrote. Um, so we'll go through maybe the next couple of turns. Maybe I'm going to aim to make this part 2 video the last part because it's just not as all the decisions are really easy and I'm really just moving counters around and I'm waiting for the dice to give me something unexpected. But until then, it's a really repeatable exercise until I get a real combat that will occur. And I actually I just like I misspoke. He didn't get away. There was a fight, but he managed to slip away and wasn't pursued, and ended up causing a step loss to the Russian. So I misspoke earlier. Just realized that he activated and got out. He didn't. There was a fight, and it just didn't. It wasn't very climactic ultimately because we chose the pursuit choice as the French and were able to get away. And um, anyway, sorry guys, I'm doing these recordings so far apart. Sometimes from when I'm playing it because it's just like, hey, I have to go do something else. I got to go run an errand or whatever, and like by the time I can get back, or I got to eat dinner, and if I come back to the game, um, yeah, I might have played it, but then I have to record it, and there's a gap there, so my bad. Uh, Davout did defend against Kutuzov. He managed to get out, and then he's, running after Napoleon in pretty good shape as a rear guard kind of guy as we go. So it's all working all right for the moment, guys. So let me go play a couple more turns, just see if anything important starts to happen. Okay, here we are after what I think this is turn seven. Seven. One, two, three, four, five, 6, 7. Yeah, seven. 7 turns. So I played through a couple turns here for this cut, and we did see something interesting happen. Um, this Russian leader here, who'd been coming up from the south for the longest time, slowly and diligently, uh, managed to actually attack Vilnius, and cut the French line of communication. Um, Now, that only lasted a short little while there before Davout was able to respond and kick them out, which was convenient. But really, the supply line is only barely open right now. And so um, it's just interesting to see that, yes, there almost was a disaster, but Napoleon is in place at, oh boy, Molodechno, and is kind of bringing up the rear, and like we're not far away from exiting the map at this point. I mean, we could aim to attack and try to destroy that Russian force, get away with something before we get home. Kutuzov, unfortunately, has failed some activations as we've been trying to move the center of operations up. Um, and I mean, it's kind of the funny thing, right? Like you have to move fast. So the Russians need to keep moving. You maybe want to move even beyond your line of communication, leave it behind. But your center of operations, if you ignore your center of operations, that's one thing. But you're never really getting to use movement commands. And if Kutuzov is failing his initiative, if all the Russian leaders are not activating very well, they're never going to catch up with the French forces that can succeed in their initiative die rolls most of the time. So there's really not much to be said besides that. That I think it's going to be more about what are the number of forces that come home. We did pull the unit from Riga, managed to get an activation off of him. He's down here with MacDonald, who is had drifted over this way. He actually lost. MacDonald was here. He lost the fight against Shishigov, and had to. He did not get captured, but he had to run back to Kovno, pick up some of the major generals now, and Davout had to save his position. But now MacDonald can actually come forward again and help keep the Vilna door open for Napoleon, and everyone runs home over the next couple of turns. So there's only 4 turns left. Certainly, Napoleon and team are going to be able to very likely get into eastern Poland. That's not really an issue. The Austrians certainly will. I would think that the die rolling might matter here. We are going to probably have to leave some stuff on the map that's not going to have gotten to activate. I maybe could be trying a little harder to pick up units like that guy, but he's kind of reaching the end of his rope as it was. We could maybe send. We could probably send a leader or something down there to get him, but I'm not super worried about it at this point. We'll have to see how it next plays. One important thing that has come up uh, is that apparently that whole thing about like there's no forced march prior to the first player's first turn, that's just a vestigial limb rule. It does not mean that Murat could not have um, forced march. He could have. We're so far past the point now. There's like I'm not going to reverse time, and we'll just have to by fiat say that Murat failed his forced march initiative check. But he had the potential to get away, actually, to at least disengage from the Zok, and then he would have either repulsed or attacked and broke out of the Russian circle around him. So that's one thing, I mean, we're just Kevin Zucker reached out directly to me on that point and let me know. So that's cleared up. But it is a vestigial limb because it kind of references the way that other 1X games in the campaigns of Napoleon series work, where sometimes you're allowed a forced march before the first turn. But here's the thing, like Highway to the Kremlin doesn't say that you do that at all. So why include a rule that says don't do this thing that we tell you isn't even in the rules? Okay. It makes more sense when you're coming from it like having played a bunch of the 1X titles, and maybe you're thinking that rule is there, and this game is telling you that it's not there. But if you've not played the other games of the series, why would you, you wouldn't even know that that was a thing, leading to confusing situations. Why have a vestigial limb? Um, I don't know. There needs to be more designer notes, honestly, in this rule system. I think that's the biggest takeaway so far in terms of the rules. The rules are can be a bit clunky. There can be odd references, like where you would think it stated something very important, it's not there, it's somewhere else. Is frustrating. But I think if there were more design notes included to help explain rules, why it's even there, why is this vestigial limb there, a little design note would indicate that. Um, but it's unreasonable to expect a new player to understand a reference to a rule that doesn't exist. Like that is strange. That's a bit ridiculous to me. So that's a trouble of this game. That truly the rules are just not. They're not what they could be. I don't even think the rules are very far from being what they could be. To be clear, easier to consume, maybe with more designer notes and a clear explanation of edge cases would be very helpful, but we don't have that. So we're left, having to make some educated guesses, or I am having to bother poor Mr. Zucker himself, which I appreciate that he's willing to answer my questions along the way, but so many of these questions, maybe could be answered in the text if they had just been a bit more refined. So that's sort of the struggle right now. Otherwise, the game can be plenty fun. It's just you're grappling with this rule situation. All right, I'm gonna go play through a couple more turns at least, and see where we get to. I might play through all the turns and just finish up and kind of assess where we've gotten to, but we'll see. Things are starting to wrap up here. Some of the units that have not activated very much, if they don't activate soon, I'm almost going to ignore them because we'll get to a point where even if they were to activate within the last turn or two, they're too far away to make any sort of difference. And things start to get wrapped up very quickly there. So, all right, I'm going to go play some more. We'll come back here in a second. Okay, folks, here we are at the end with the French forces off map. Napoleon exited the map on the second to last turn, and by the last turn, all the French were in the sort of pinkish, tannish area that denotes the Polish areas, and we are counting that in terms of our victory. So, what to think here? Kutuzov tried to get in there. There were actually some fights at the border, just to see could we shift. So there was some fighting along this last stretch of road, and I'd say the French probably came out ahead on that. All told, the Russians eventually just abandoned the line of communication, and maybe they should have done that more anyway. Um, but it didn't make for a whole lot of difference ultimately. They were reliant, both the French and the Russians at times were using the supply hexes as lily pads to jump to and use for forage value. So that kind of worked out, that constraint on logistics. And at the end, the Russians kind of went balls to the wall to try to damage the French some. Now, my count here comes out to be 40 strength points made at home for the French, 39 on the entire Russian map. And um, it's a bit odd, to be honest. Actually, scratch that. It's 40. I forgot about a reinforcement step that I should have put on the board. So it's about equal. And again, going back to the outset of this, like, it's really hard to adjudicate the proper victory here, guys, because so much of it feels like if you factor like, oh, do I get to place those extra garrisons? Well, should I? If I do that, am I putting victory points on the board there for the comparison at the end? Or am I depriving myself of extending my own supply lines and reestablishing my depots? And maybe that's a strategy decision. I'm going to call this one a draw, if only because I don't feel like, if you're, this is a critical analysis victory, right? Like you have to success d'estime, if I can speak French very, very poorly for you. If it's really just a critical evaluation of a victory here, I can't say that anyone really got away with it. I think bagging Murat was great, so that was +1 big time for the Russians. But at the end, that Tishagov's force actually got eliminated and got captured at the end, towards the end, I should say, which actually bumped up the Paris morale to -2, which was very nice. Um, but it didn't feel like quite the same oomph as knocking out Murat and capturing Murat. So both sides kind of had some niceties occur, um, but the Russians probably didn't have enough force concentrated to really expect to have any like climactic pitched battle with Napoleon on the retreat, and they tend not to be very good at pursuing. And so it was really hard to hit the French in any meaningful way. And if we were playing the game of like, you just need to cut their line of communication, again, I gave up a lot of initiative and map position by spending all my AP surrounding Murat. Probably shouldn't have done that. Maybe if we had balanced the approach on turn one, we'd be looking at a very different pro Russia end state that would be, we'd appreciate a great deal, but we didn't get that. That's not what we got in this. So um, I think the key thing would have been way back. I need to like move my map around here a little bit so you can appreciate it. When we were here, what we should have probably have done is like fought Murat to some degree and sent as many forces. There's not a lot of great terrain here, but like done something to wind up over here around Vyazma and forcing Napoleon, kind of like history, to come down south instead or do something, and then shadow him in around this, and then maybe keep him in the severe weather zone for longer and cause him to take much, much more attrition. And then, he's having a hard time just getting out of the zone to survive. I think that had been more exciting. So I apologize, guys, in terms of like watching this retreat campaign. That very early operational strategic decision probably led to a much less interesting campaign. So use this maybe as a lesson for you. If you're going to play this scenario, you're going to start a retreat campaign just to see how the retreat goes. Don't make my mistake as the Russians. Definitely try to get between Napoleon and his supply line. Make that a priority. Hit Murat if you can, but don't be depressed if it doesn't go that way or doesn't go well. That's just more strength points that the French have to manage that will take attrition. So big mistake that probably ripple affected the whole rest of the campaign. But at least we got to play through something here where Napoleon's trying to run back to a friendly territory that I wanted to experience before I finished my coverage of the game. In terms of post-mortem, again, there's not much to say here, guys. I think the key point is the French did what they could, and they did it reasonably well. The Russians really bungled an important decision. Had we forced Napoleon to take a southern path to Kaluga, that might have just increased some potential for interesting events like more actual touch combat occurring or a greater need for Napoleon to waste movement points trying to get around Russian forces back onto the highways, back maybe having to pull Victor up rather than sit in Smolensk and play backup or the baton buddy to meet up with, and we just didn't get quite that. So obviously the really critical element of this retreat is like this region, which how that goes is going to influence the rest of your campaign, and then everything after that really plays off of how does that go. And if the French can get on the highway and start heading west, they can afford a little attrition. If they can get out of the severe weather zone, that's really important. We had a lot of snow through the end of the sessions here, which that was obviously a factor in what was going on. Plenty of snow actually, and we actually got even more snow than the dice would tell you, because at the tail end of November I kept rolling threes for weather rather than something else. So it just ended up being a lot of snow, a lot of frozen river kind of stuff starting to happen. Um, so yeah, there you go, guys. That's the retreat scenario. Interesting, probably not as fun as the full campaign because you have so much in front of you in the full campaign. And I just take this opportunity to say, like, I've been pretty harsh on the rules. I think that's probably valid and justified. But there is a lot of interesting carrot and sticks in the system where, like, if you're the Russians, you probably don't like the idea of giving up Smolensk. You want to have a fight of it. It's about that. This game operates in time blocks. What happens between the start of the game and Smolensk, assuming the Russian or the French get there, which they probably will. Did anything really bad or really good happen? Well, that's gonna change your perspective on, like, is it worthwhile losing Smolensk without a fight? Because there's always that possibility, right? Like the French have an incentive to try to get into these cities because there's always that 1 in 6 chance that they get an absolute gangbusters result and they get high morale. Or maybe they get up to +3 morale, and that gives the French player, let's say they get lucky, they get a ton of bandwidth to decide, do we stop at Smolensk? Like, you can win the game that way. It's probably going to be tough, but you could do it. If you've got high morale and you're hanging out in a not burned down Smolensk, like, yeah, you could actually choose to operate out of Smolensk for the rest of the game as the French player. You give up going for Moscow, but there's a strategy there. Now, if you go up to Smolensk and it burns down to the ground and you don't get any victory points, and you're sitting on like no good victory points, you almost have no choice but to try to push on or to make something happen. So it's not immediately clear when you start playing the game, but it starts to make sense that Riga, Smolensk, Moscow really truly are very, very important. And whether or not you've managed to get a critical victory or captured a leader or lost a critical battle or lost a leader maybe is the important thing. Um, that's going to influence how much risk you can handle as you play through the rest of the campaign, and then that affects everything else going into uh, where the game truly ends. So, like, maybe if you got really lucky and you were sitting on extremely high morale uh, from battles, let's say you did the impossible and what I feel is probably very difficult in this system. You managed to really beat the hell out of the Russian armies and you've picked up critical victory morale points. Well, then capturing the cities are not as big a deal, and even losing them later won't be a big deal. If most of your morale is coming from those critical battle victories, like, you're not going to lose those unless you get an equal loss against you later. And if you're winning that many critical victories, it's probably becoming less and less likely that your opponent's going to be able to achieve a battle victory on you to such degree of losses. And you can actually, kind of push the map, take Smolensk at your leisure, um, go towards Moscow without feeling a great amount of risk, because if your morale is already high, all you need to do is walk into Moscow. You don't care if it burns down, you're probably going to get a good negotiation die roll. So I think that's really interesting. Like I do think those are the right carrots and sticks, where like you can, as the Russians, just ignore these important cities. Like you have to think about them in context. You have to think about, uh, not giving up a good, army victory to the French. So that may mean like, you're, assuming you've had no bad disasters happen to your army, that's this is an incentive to keep your army out of Napoleon's jaws. You don't mind if Smolensk falls as much because you've not lost elsewhere. You can afford to take that die roll chance, but you're balancing that. If you've screwed up a little bit and say Napoleon ate Doktorov alive for breakfast and scored some critical victory VP, like now you're worried about what happens when he gets into Smolensk. Maybe you're changing your perspective on what you need to be doing in your grand strategy. And I think that's a really cool element of the game. I think that's a really cool element of the system. I think the battle system is actually really interesting once you start to understand the nuances of it. I think the attrition system is really uh, good because it forces you to think about how you move, much more than I think in a lot of games where it can be really simplistic, or even in other games on this subject where it's like, oh well, you're gonna have to roll extra attrition, or you get more modifiers. You have more modifiers in this game for sure, but you have a lot more bandwidth of deciding how you're going to move and what are your alternatives. Do you stop at a depot hex to use the forage value, or do you push on farther? Do you only spend a few movement points in the hope that you won't get any attrition, rather than always having to deal with some attrition because the game just forces it on you? You can figure out like what can I do to not take any attrition? How much distance can I cover? It might not be very much, but that's actually a huge deal. Like being able to figure out, what do I want to take on here? How willing am I to go hard against the Russians? And I think historically speaking, um, the French player in history probably pushed his army much harder than I have, had been more willing to push their luck by just saying, I'm going to move the maximum number of movement points on a forced march. Because if I move 5 movement points, that's a +5 to the die roll, right? That's absolutely going to kill men. But do you do that with the idea that you're going to cut off Bagration from Barclay? Like, that's a very real decision to make. Do you want to do that? And I think that level of sort of campaign management is unique. So these are things that are going to start to float into my review, which will likely be the next video I do for this game. Like, I have played it quite a lot, guys. I've played the battle scenario. I've done a hell of a job trying to figure out how the rules actually work, and that's been a saga. That's a story in this coverage that we've done in this series. I've played a campaign to at least one end state, and I've played a different shortened campaign so that we saw the other side of that end state. And so I feel like I've played this game enough, and I've wrestled with the rules enough that I can do a proper review. And we'll do that here very, very soon. I'm not sure how soon, over probably the next week. I'm going to find the time to sit down and actually do the review here for this game. So hope you've enjoyed sticking with, if you've made it through all the videos up to this point, or at least you're checking in. We'll see you in the review video. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Keep gaming.